Hi, welcome to ND Reports. Today's topic is Capitalism in Crisis. US billionaires worry about the survival of the system that made them rich. Yes, a perfect California day. The sun was shining, a gentle breeze was blowing, and at the Silicon Valley coffee shop, Representative Roconna was sitting across from one of his many billionaire constituents discussing an uncomfortable subject, the growing unpopularity of billionaires and their giant technical companies. There's some more humility out there, Kana said. The billionaire on the other side of the table let out a nervous laugh. Chris Larsen was in his third startup and well on his way to being one of the wealthiest people in the valley, if not the world. Realizing people hate your guts has some value, he joked. For decades, Democrats and Republicans have hailed America's business elite, especially in Silicon Valley, as the country's salvation. The government might be gridlocked, the electorate angry and divided, but America's innovators seem to promise a relatively pain-free way out of the mess. Their company produced an endless series of products that kept the US economy churning and its gross domestic product climbing. Their philanthropic efforts were aimed at fixing some of the country's most vexing problems. Government's role was to stay out of the way. Now that consensus is shattering, for the first time in decades, capitalism future is a subject of debate among presidential hopefuls and a source of growing angst for American business elites. In places such as Silicon Valley, the slope of Davos, Switzerland, and the halls of Harvard Business School, there is a sense that the kind of capitalism that once made Americans and economic envy is responsible for the growing inequality and anger that is tearing the country apart. On a quiet weekday at a strip mall coffee shop, the conversation between Khan and Larsen turned to what went so wrong. Americans still love technology, Khan said, but too many of them felt locked out of the country's economic future and were looking for someone to blame. What happened to us? He imagined people in this left-behind place asking. Part of Khan's solution was to sign on a joint chairman of the presidential campaigns of Bernie Sanders, the Democratic socialist who rose to the national stage by rallying against the handful billionaires who control the economic and political life of this nation and who disproportionately and who live in Khan's district. The other part of Khan's solution was to do what he was doing now, talking to billionaire tech executives like Larsen who worried that the current path for both capitalism and Silicon Valley was unsustainable. Boosted by cryptocurrency spike last year, Larsen's net worth had briefly hit $29 billion, making him the fifth richest person in the world before the currency value fell. Without an intervention, he worried that wealth would continue to pile up in Silicon Valley and anger in the country would continue to grow. It seems like every company in the world has to be here, Larsen said. It's just painfully obvious that the blob is getting bigger. At some point, Larsen and Khan worried something was going to break. The 1980 financial crisis may have revealed the weakness of American capitalism, but it was Donald Trump's election and the pent-up anger it exposed that left Americans' billionaire class fearful for capitalism future. Middle of revolution. Khan was elected in 2016 just as the Just as this started to spread in Europe, for right nationalist parties were gaining ground closer to home, socialists and Trump-inspired nationalists were winning state and congressional elections. Conservation of the sort that Kana was having with Larson were now taking place in some of capitalism's most rarefied circles, including Harvard Business School, where last fall Seth Carman, a highly influential billionaire investor, delivered what he described as a plaintive wail to the business community to fix capitalism before it was too late. The setting was the opening of Carman Hall, a new $220 million conference center built with his family donation. It's a choice to pay people as little as you can or work them as hard as you can, he told the audience gathered in the 1,000-seat auditorium. It's a choice to maintain pleasant working conditions or harsh ones, to offer good benefits or paltry ones. If business leaders didn't ask hard questions about capitalism, he warned that they would be asked by ideologies seeking to point fingers, assign blame, and make reckless changes to the system. Six months after that speech, Carman was struck by how quickly his dire prediction was coming to pass. Leading politicians such as Trump, Sanders, and San Elizabeth Warren were advocating positions on tariffs, wealth taxes, changes in corporate governance that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. Carman wasn't opposed to more progressive taxation or regulation, but he worried that this new proposal went much too far. I think we're in the middle of revolution, not a guns revolution, but a revolution where people, both extremes, want to blow it up, and good things don't happen to the vast majority of population in the revolution, he said. He wasn't the only one who felt a sense of alarm. One of the most popular classes at Harvard Business School, home to the next generation of Fortune 500 executives, was class on the reimagining capitalism 7 years ago. The elective started with 28 students. Now there were nearly 200 taking it. During that period, the students had grown increasingly cynical about corporation and the government, said Rebecca Henderson, the Harvard economist who teaches the course. What the tourist surveys say is what I see, she said. They are really worried about the direction in which the US and the world's heading. A few dozen of those students spent their winter break reading Winner Take All, a book by Anand Giridharadas, a journalist and former McKinsey consultant that had hit the bestseller list and was provoking heated arguments in places like Silicon Valley, Davos, and Harvard Business School. Giridharadas' book was a withering attack on American billionaires class and the nation that Americans, economics capitalists, could use their wealth, creativity to solve big social and economic problems that have eluded at polluting and dividing governments. This spring, Giridharadas took his argument to Carman Hall. He slammed Mark Zuckerberg, taking aim at the Facebook founder's $100 million effort to fix New York's faltering school and his $3 billion push to end disease in a generation. I am glad he is trying to get rid of all the disease, but I wish Facebook wasn't a plug, Giridharadas said. He tries Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz, independent president, to run his effort to protect the interests of the uber-wealthy and lambasted nation, frequently championed by the likes of Bill Gates and Barack Obama, that Silicon Valley innovation would disrupt all hierarchy and spread capitalism rewards. Really? Giridharadas asked. Now 5 companies control America instead of 100, and a lot of those companies are whiter and more male than the ones they disrupted. For many of students schooled in the nation that business could make a profit while making the world a better place, Grit Harris' ideas were both energizing and disorienting. Erika Eiterhoven, a second-year student, recalled one of her fellow classmates turning to her when Grit Harris was finished. "So, what should we do?" her college asked. "Is he saying we shouldn't go into banking or consulting?" added another student. There was a palpable sense of personal desperation. Runaway capitalism. Khan experienced a version of his desperation almost every day in his district. He grew up in overwhelmingly white, middle-class suburb of Philadelphia. After college and Yale Law School, he moved to Silicon Valley in 2003, hoping to use his training as a lawyer to help set the rules for a lawless online world. In 2014, backed by the tech community and long roster of billionaire donors, Khan challenged an 8-term incumbent in a Democratic primary and lost. The defeat caused him to reflect on what he had missed, in particular, the problems that runaway capitalism were causing in his district, where the median home value in formerly blue-collar cities argued past $2 million. "The best thing that happened to me was that I lost my 2014 election," he said. "Had I won, maybe I would have been a traditional neoliberal. It really forced my self-reflection, and it pointed out every weakness I ever had." In California, Cannon's home is a small apartment around the corner from a Dollar Tree, one of only 2 in his district. His wife and 2 children live most of the year in Washington, where home values are cheaper. His days are split between meetings with billionaires and his many constituents who are struggling to stay afloat amid Silicon Valley's success. "I am an 11-year renter with a master's degree," a teacher told him at a meeting with school employees. Her question wasn't about whether she would ever be able to afford a home, but about a fellow teacher who couldn't afford health insurance. A few days earlier, he had met with 2 activists who wanted his help, pressuring big tech companies to pay contract, janitorial, and cafeteria workers a living wage. Khan agreed to host a press event on their behalf. The billionaires in Khan's district, meanwhile, were consumed a different worry. Mixed in with the valley's usual frothy optimism about disruption and inventing the future was a growing sense that the tech economy had somehow broken capitalism. The digital revolution had allowed tech entrepreneurs to build massive global companies without the big job-producing factories or large workforce of the industrial era. The result was more and more wealth concentrated in fewer hands. As technology advanced, some future things were only going to get worse. Robots were eliminating much factory work, online commerce were decimating retail, and self-driving cars were on the verge of phasing out truck drivers. The next step was computers that could learn and think. "What happens if you can actually automate all human intellectual labor?" said Greg Brockman, chairman of OpenAI, a company backed by several Silicon Valley billionaires. "Such thinking computers might be able to diagnose diseases better than doctors by drawing on superhuman amounts of clinical research," said Brockman. "They could displace a large number of office jobs. Eventually," he said, "the job shortage would force the government to pay people to pursue their passions or simply leave." Only Andrew Yang, a long-shot presidential candidate and tech entrepreneur supported the idea of government paying citizens a regular income, but the idea of a universal basic income was discussed regularly in the valley. The prospect was both energizing and terrifying. O'Ponnell had recently added a ethicist. Brockman sometimes referred to her as a philosopher to its staff of about 100 employees to help sort through the implication of its innovation. To Brockman, a feature without work seemed just like a one without meat, a possible that many in the valley viewed as a near certainty. Once we have meat, substitutes as good as the real thing, my expectation is that we are going to look back at eating meat on this terrible immoral thing. He said the same could be true of work in a future in era of advanced artificial intelligence. We will look back and say, wow, that was so crazy and almost immoral that people were forced to go and labor in order to be able to survive. A blueprint for opportunity. Khan hears such prophecy all the time, but mostly discounted them as fantasy. His focus was on fixing the version of capitalism that existed today. He often pleaded with big tech executives to spend just 10% of their time thinking about what they could do for their country and 90% to their companies. The tougher question was exactly what he wanted them to do with that 10%. On a warm spring evening, Khan was trying to answer that question for about 2,000 Silicon Valley tech executives, software engineering, and venture capitalists. The group gathered at a $5 million Mediterranean-style villa purchased atop a hill overlooking Cupertino, which glittered in the valley below. Khan described a December trip he organized to tiny Jefferson, Java, for a group of tech executives that include Microsoft Chief Technology Officer and a LinkedIn co-founder. The executives donated to the community college scholarship funds and paid to equip its computer lab with the goal of training 20 to 35 students for software developer jobs starting at $65,000 per year. Khan had made similar trips with the West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. The total number of jobs these trips produced was small, and the pay wasn't great. Still, Khan believed that served a larger purpose. They proved that people in Silicon Valley cared about places like Jefferson, a rural town of only 2,000. They gave people hope that even the remotest parts of America could take part in the country's tech revolution. The next step, Khan told the executives at the mansion in Cupertino, was a $100 billion effort to build 50 technology institutions similar to land-grant colleges to train workers in left-behind America. Khan had already introduced a bill that he admitted was unlikely to pass, but that wasn't really the point. It sets a blueprint, he said.